Sailing, sailing
Ocean Liners, Part 3.
For many a stormy wind shall blow where Jack comes home again. Sailing, sailing over the bounding main. For many a stormy wind shall blow where Jack comes home again. Many a stormy wind.
Table of Contents, Ocean Liners, Part 3.
All about ocean liners. Especially the great ships of the golden age of ocean liners traversing the Atlantic Ocean. Dr. Sydney Soclof. Dr. Sydney22@gmail.com. 2023. Narration by Dr. Sydney Soclof,
Zoe Phonemes,
and Nathan Koltov. For a complete discussion of YouTube navigation, please go to tiny.1/ytnavigator.
Art Deco was a popular design movement from 1910 until 1939, affecting the decorative arts, such as architecture, interior design, and industrial design, as well as the visual arts such as fashion painting, graphic arts, and film.
This movement was, in a sense, an amalgamation of many different styles and movements of the early 20th century, including Constructionism, Cubism, Modernism, Bauhaus, Art Nouveau, and Futurism.
The popularity of Art Deco apexed during the 1920s. Although many design movements have political or philosophical roots or intentions, Art Deco was purely decorative. At the time, this style was seen as elegant, functional, and ultra-modern.
In the 1930s, Art Deco was a significant influence on the interior design of ocean liners. The roots of Art Deco go back to the turn of the 20th century when, in 1901, the Société des Artistes Décorateurs was formed in Paris.
Their goal was to merge the mass production of modern industrial technology with the decorative arts.
Then in 1925, a now famous exposition was held in Paris called Exposition Internationale d'Art Décoratif et Industriel Moderne.
It is from this exposition that the term Art Deco is derived, although the actual term came into use only much later.
This new style was inspired by the machine age and especially the streamlined shape of airplanes and automobiles. It was applied to architecture, furniture, appliances, trains, and almost everything else, and most especially to passenger ships. This was a sleek, new, streamlined, and especially modern style in the post-World War I days that became a break from the stiff styles of the past. This style was applied enthusiastically to the design and especially to the interior decoration of ocean liners. Previously, the ocean liners had attempted to copy the look of familiar objects on land.
For example, palaces, grand hotels, and the buildings in the classical Renaissance or Baroque styles. Perhaps to reassure the passenger of familiar surroundings and induce a feeling of being safely on land.
Art Deco was a complete break from the past, and now the stylistic environment has become a vision toward the future where speed, streamlining, and the wonders of modern technology are emphasized.
The principal elements of Art Deco are an emphasis on geometrical shapes and parallel lines.
In colors, muted pastel colors are favored.
These are examples of the Art Deco style.
A more futuristic development of Art Deco was known as Streamline Modern, with smooth lines and sweeping curves. Design elements from ocean liners, such as porthole windows and tube railings, we borrowed and incorporated into buildings on land.
Here is the Normandy Hotel in Miami, which has a streamlined Art Deco style reminiscent of an ocean liner.
Italian ocean liners.
Italy's premier liner of the 1930s, the Rex, was called Riviera afloat because of the large outdoor deck spaces and swimming pools with real sand.
Italy's Conte de Savoia is an example of Italian exuberance in large deck spaces and pools.
The RMS Queen Mary. Because of the poor economic conditions, the British government forced the Cunard Line and White Star Line to merge in 1933.
With the assistance of the British government, the newly merged company produced its new liners, the RMS Queen Mary and the RMS Queen Elizabeth.
The keel for the RMS Queen Mary was laid on December 1, 1930. Completion was interrupted by the Depression, so the maiden voyage didn't occur until 1936. Although Cunard wanted to be known for safety rather than speed, the RMS Queen Mary held the Blue Riband from 1936 to 1937 and from 1938 to 1952.
However, the speed came at a significant cost in fuel mileage as it got only 13 feet per gallon of fuel oil. To travel a full length of 1,020 feet required 78 gallons of fuel.
Here the RMS Queen Mary is under construction. 4 million rivets were used on her hull and upper decks.
Here, the RMS Queen Mary under construction in the John Brown Shipyard towers over the town of Clydebank in Scotland.
The naming of the hull 534. A royal misunderstanding. Or was it? We will never know for sure.
The naming of the hull 534. The Cunard Board of Directors decided to name the new ship RMS Queen Victoria.
Needing royal assent to do this, they approached King George V and asked him for permission to name the ship after Britain's greatest queen.
Thinking of his wife, Mary, King George V responded, "My wife will be delighted."
The Cunard board then had no other choice than to change the name to RMS Queen Mary. All of the china destined for the ship had RMS Queen Victoria emblazoned on it and had to be broken up. And all new china was ordered.
This is the RMS Queen Mary, leaving Clydebank dock after completion of her fitting out in September 1934.
This is the Cunard White Star Line. RMS Queen Mary.
This is the RMS Queen Mary's daily Ocean Times. At the start of the maiden voyage, Thursday, May 28, 1936.
This is the RMS Queen Mary, going up the Hudson River on June 1, 1936. This is the Art Deco main dining room of the RMS Queen Mary on her maiden voyage in 1936.
This is the first-class mine lounge on the RMS Queen Mary.
This is the first-class shopping center on the RMS Queen Mary, called Piccadilly Circus. The RMS Queen Mary launched in 1936 also followed this trend, although not to the same extent as the ships of the French line. Indeed, at present, the RMS Queen Mary moored in Long Beach, California, holds one of the largest repositories of Art Deco artifacts in the world. This is the first-class swimming pool on the RMS Queen Mary. The first-class pool on the RMS Queen Mary was the most ornate to ever be put on a Cunard ship.
A weekly feature of the New York Herald Tribune was a map showing the positions of ocean liners in the North Atlantic. On a single day in July 1938, there were 58 liners on the Atlantic Ocean. These included the RMS Queen Mary, 11, the Normandy, 24, and the Ile-de-France, 29.
Ocean liners such as the RMS Queen Mary and RMS Queen Elizabeth were used once again in World War II, although not as merchant cruisers. They were mostly used as troop ships and hospital ships.
During World War II, the two great queens contributed to the war effort by transporting vast amounts of forces across the globe, with a total of 320,000 men from North America to Europe alone.
This is the RMS Queen Mary being painted gray in New York in 1939 before her wartime duties as a tow-up ship began.
The RMS Queen Elizabeth painted gray and leaving the Clydebank shipyard in 1940 to begin her troop ship duties.
The forward section of the RMS Queen Mary was fitted with anti-aircraft guns.
This is the RMS Queen Mary's dining hall.
This is the hospital ward of the RMS Queen Mary during WW II. This is the RMS Queen Mary in Sydney Harbor, on the way to the Middle East in 1940. Behind her is the RMS Aquitania, also getting ready to sail.
This is the bow of the RMS Queen Mary after the collision with the cruiser Caraco, while zigzagging of the coast of Scotland in October 1942. The replacement bow came from U.S. Steel in Gary, Indiana.
The RMS Queen Mary was known as the Rolling Mary, as it rolled up to 30 degrees. During World War II, more than 90% of the soldiers on the RMS Queen Mary got seasick. After the war, stabilizers were added to the ship, which reduced the roll to less than 12 degrees.
The RMS Queen Mary established an all-time record in the number of passengers for any vessel in war peace when she departed from New York in July 1943 with 16,683 souls aboard.
Winston Churchill was a frequent passenger on the RMS Queen Mary during WW II. He crossed the North Atlantic Ocean under great secrecy for meetings with President Franklin D. Roosevelt.
This is the RMS Queen Mary arriving in New York Harbor on June 20, 1945, with thousands of U.S. troops.
This is the RMS Queen Elizabeth arriving home with returning troops.
These are British war brides leaving for the U.S. in 1945.
The RMS Queen Elizabeth was restored to peacetime duties in 1946.
Flames consumed the RMS Queen Elizabeth, and she sank in Hong Kong Harbor in January 1972.
The RMS Queen Mary inspired many newspaper and magazine articles and books. This is a poster of the RMS Queen Mary.
Greta Garbo boarded the RMS Queen Mary in Southampton in 1947. The post-World War II era was a brief but busy period. Notable transatlantic liners included the SS United States, which was the last ocean liner to hold the Blue Riband, and the SS France, which held the record for the longest passenger ship from when she entered service in 1961 until the launch of RMS Queen Mary II in 2003.
This is the RMS Queen Elizabeth after conversion to peacetime service.
This is the RMS Queen Mary leaving Southampton for the last time. The ship had 36 captains in her 31 years of service.
This shows the conversion of the RMS Queen Mary to a museum ship and hotel at Long Beach in 1967.
This is the RMS Queen Mary, is a floating hotel in Long Beach. The ship is floating within a protective enclosure, but rides up and down with the tide with a daily range of 6½ feet.
The RMS Queen Mary is now a hotel, tourist attraction and maritime museum in Long Beach, California.
This is the RMS Queen Mary as a hotel next to a Russian Foxtrot-class submarine in Long Beach, California. This is the bow section of the RMS Queen Mary.
The RMS Queen Mary First Class dining room could hold all 815 first-class passengers in one sitting. It was the largest dining room on the ship. This is the RMS Queen Mary at Long Beach.
This is the RMS Queen Mary well deck and bow.
The well deck allows water that splashes up over the bow when running at high speeds through rough seas to exit out the sides and thus not flow back through the rest of the deck.
This is the bridge of the RMS Queen Mary.
This is a long corridor in the RMS Queen Mary.
This is the promenade deck of the RMS Queen Mary.
This is my stateroom on the RMS Queen Mary in my view of Long Beach. This is the RMS Queen Mary.
This is the bridge of the RMS Queen Mary. It is now open to visitors.
The XS United States.
The Korean War. Starting in 1950 at the beginning of the long Cold War, worried the U.S. government about the need to transport their troops to various locations worldwide. Air transportation could not yet provide the same transport capacity as the great ocean liners of the time.
So, the government, in a joint effort with the United States Lines, decided to order a liner that would become one of the most splendid ones that has ever sailed the seas. A liner that would, for the first time in a century, enter the Americans in the race on the North Atlantic.
The U.S. government set up 3 conditions the ship would have to meet. She would have to be fast, safe and easy to convert into a trooper.
This is a postcard of the SS United States.
The task of building the new liner was given to the Newport News Shipbuilding and Dry Dock Company in Virginia. It was supervised by the master naval architect William Francis Gibbs. The keel of his future masterpiece was laid down on February 8, 1950. The new ship was named the SS United States on June 23, 1951. To give her the great speed that was called for, Gibbs had installed massive turbines originally intended for aircraft carriers. To meet the other 2 safety and quick convertibility requirements, Gibbs gave the ship a new, more straightforward type of interior design. Almost obsessed with creating an utterly fireproof ship, Gibbs had been careful to use no flammable materials when fitting her out.
The XS United States was a ship of glass, steel, synthetics and aluminum. Furniture, handrails and deck chairs we all made of aluminum. Gibbs even wanted the Steinway Company to make a piano of aluminum for the United States, but they refused to do so. In the end, it was said that the only wood that could be found on board the United States was in the piano and the butcher's block.
The simple interiors also made the possible conversion into a troop ship an easy task. Compared to the older ships, which could take up to 3 months to convert, the United States could be turned into a trooper capable of carrying 15,000 souls in mere days. Since the government demanded these features, They paid almost 70% of the ship's total cost, which ended up at $78 million.
This shows a cutaway view of the SS United States. With a length of 990 feet, the SS United States was the longest American ship ever built. She had a slightly smaller beam than the two Queens, but this had its purpose. At 101 feet wide, she could just make it through the Panama Canal, something the two giant Cunarders were not capable of. This was also a promise of quick troop transports, should any ever be necessary. Actually, the SS United States would never serve as a trooper, although she was put on standby during the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. But the world would remember the new SS United States for one thing, her incredible speed. During her 6 weeks-long sea trials, she averaged a fantastic 38.25 knots. Going in reverse, the United States could easily maintain 20 knots. All thanks to her Westinghouse turbines, which gave her a tremendous 240,000 horsepower. Due to the ship's possible military role, these speed figures were kept top secret and were not made public until 1978. Nonetheless, it was unquestionable that the maiden voyage of the SS United States would be a record-breaking, probably even a record-crushing one.
The SS United States truly lived up to these high expectations when, on July 3, 1952, she left her pier in New York on her maiden voyage bound for Lee Haven, Southampton. When arriving at Bishop's Rock, she averaged an astonishing 35.59 knots and shaved 10 hours and 2 minutes off the RMS Queen Mary's 14-year-old record. During her maiden voyage, the SS United States had only used 2/3 of her total power. Had she been going at full speed throughout the voyage, the margin to the RMS Queen Mary's old record would unarguably been much greater. The SS United States enjoyed immediate popularity, affectionately called the Big U, during the 1950s. The majority of transatlantic travelers were Americans, and the fact that the SS United States was the only American superliner often meant that they chose to cross on her.
Despite her somewhat cold and straightforward interiors, she represented the new breed of ocean liners, and many people soon had her as their favorite ship. Among them the Duke and Duchess of Windsor, who previously had favored the two Queens. The SS United States worked on the North Atlantic with the smaller SS America as a running mate.
The SS United States and the SS America received a welcome along the Hudson River on their first visit to New York in June 1952.
For the first time, the Cunard's two Queens faced worthy rivals. This competition continued through the 1950s, but as the next decade began, a new competitor entered the quest for the North Atlantic.
With the introduction of the jet airplane, passengers now had the opportunity to cross the North Atlantic at a speed of 550 miles per hour, 480 knots, in just 6 to 8 hours.
Not even the swift United States could stand up to such incredible speeds. Like all other transatlantic shipping lines, the United States lines now suffered a significant loss of money. Things were undoubtedly not easier when the crew members' unions began demanding higher wages for their members.
As a result of these problems, and to bring in some extra profit, the United States lines began using their flagship for a purpose she had never been intended for, cruising.
In 1961, the U.S. Congress permitted the SS United States to do off-season cruises, and she set out on her first such cruise on January 20, 1962. It was a 14-day cruise out of New York, and ports of call included Nassau, St. Thomas, Trinidad, Curacao, and Cristobal, with a minimum rate of $520. In late 1969, the SS United States was laid up. The Big U was put under the authority of the U.S. Federal Maritime Administration in 1973. As the more significant part of her construction had been a state secret, they explained that she could never be sold to non-American interests.
However, in 1996, she was towed to the Navy Yards in Philadelphia. And so, in Philadelphia, she remains to this day. The SS United States lies idle at her pier, awaiting her uncertain future.
In 2003, the Norwegian cruise line purchased the ship with the intent of restoring her to a service role in their newly announced American-flagged Hawaiian passenger service. This gave hope of the SS United States being rescued in the same manner as the France Norway had once been.
In June 2004, NCL reflagged the Pride of Aloha cruise ship as an American vessel and stated that the SS United States would be the last vessel to be rehabilitated into their cruise itinerary by 2010 due to the extensive nature of the refit required.
In August 2004, NCL conducted feasibility studies, and in May 2006, the chairman of the Cruises, which owns NCL, announced that the company's next project was the restoration of the SS United States. So, there is a chance that we have not yet seen the end of her great career.
Specifications of the SS United States.
The busiest day ever for ocean liners in New York was September 3, 1957, when a dozen liners were in port. A total of 9,300 passengers debarked. Shown here from the left is the MS Britannic, RMS Queen Mary, RMS Mauritania, French lines Flandre, Greek Olympia, the SS United States and the SS Independence. SS France. The SS France was built in 1962. It was the last liner built solely for the transatlantic trade. By the 1950s, the leading ships of the French line, the Ile de France and the Liberté, were aging and would be retired soon. The French needed to compete with foreign shipping companies. There was talk about the British planning a 75,000-ton replacement to the RMS Queen Mary and RMS Queen Elizabeth, and the Americans seemed eager to build a sister ship to the speed champion SS United States.
The first French thoughts about an answer to these ships were constructing two 35,000-ton vessels to operate on the North Atlantic. However, these plans were given up in the second half of the 1950s in favor of one large and stunning superliner that would help France to re-establish itself in the eyes of the world. Like the stunning Normandy of 1935, this new liner must be a showpiece and a morale builder.
On July 26, 1956, a new vessel was ordered by the Compagnie Générale Transatlantique to the famous Chantiers de l'Atlantique shipyard in Saint-Nazaire. The requirements were that the liner be the longest ever constructed and one of the fastest. Her length of 316 meters remained unchallenged until the construction of the 345-meter RMS Queen Mary II in 2004. This ship had to be something special for France's sake and for the fact that it would replace the Ile de France and the Liberté.
The construction took 2 years and 8 months. On May 11, 1960, The new pride of the French line was given the very appropriate name, France, to honor both the country and the two early namesakes in the CGT fleet. The Blue Riband would undoubtedly have been in France's range, considering she would be slightly faster than the RMS Queen Mary. The only obstacle was the Speed Queen SS United States of the United States lines with a service speed of 35 knots was a rival challenging to beat. The SS France's interior's weather ship displayed its purpose as a showcase of modern French art and design.
The two funnels were a special piece of the SS France's extraordinary appearance. They were constructed with two wings on the sides to lead the smoke away from the passenger decks below. This practical improvement gave the SS France an exceptional appearance.
At 66,343 gross tons, the SS France was the third largest vessel in service after the two Queens and the fourth largest in all history, counting her predecessor Normandy. Her length of 1,035 feet made her the longest ocean liner ever constructed. The service speed of 31 knots made the SS France the second fastest liner in the world.
This is the SS France, docking at New York's Hudson River piers, at the end of her maiden transatlantic voyage.
The SS France became a popular ship on the North Atlantic, but as the air traffic increased for every year that went by, fewer and fewer people chose to go by sea when they could travel more than 10 times faster with a jet airplane. The SS France became more and more dependent on the annual subsidies the French government gave the French line. The SS France had just 10 years of service on the Atlantic Ocean before the French government ended her subsidy in 1974. And her sailings ended.
The SS France had been designed for transatlantic service only. But when times became harder, she was sent out on cruises to the warmer parts of the globe. Even though she only had in-due pools and limited deck space, she remained popular among the cruise passengers because of her fine North Atlantic reputation.
Using the ship's versatile design to its full potential, the CGT began to send the SS France on more cruises during the winter, which was off-season for the Atlantic trade. One design flaw, however, was revealed when the ship reached warmer waters. Her two swimming pools, one each for first and tourist class, were both indoors. The first-class pool deep within the ship's hull, and the tourist-class pool on an upper deck, but covered with an immovable glass dome. The latter, perhaps, was the more aggravating in hot weather. She also had limited outdoor deck space, with much of what was available protected behind thick glass windscreens. Useful on the North Atlantic but frustrating when blocking cooling breezes in the tropics. The RMS Queen Elizabeth II suffered from a similar design flaw as well.
The first world cruise of the SS France was in 1972. She went from Europe around southern South America because she was, and is, too big for the Panama Canal. She then went on to Australia, Hong Kong, India, and South Africa.
This is the first-class dining room of the SS France. By 1972, only 4 major transatlantic liners remained in service. They were the RMS Queen Elizabeth II, Michelangelo, Raffaello, and the SS France. As the opening years of the 1970s progressed, the cruise market expanded, seeing the construction of smaller, purpose-built cruise ships that could also fit through the Panama Canal. Worse, in 1973, the oil crisis hit, and the price of oil went from $3 to $12 per barrel.
As the opening years of the 1970s progressed, the cruise market expanded, seeing the construction of smaller, purpose-built cruise ships that could also fit through the Panama Canal. Worse, in 1973, the oil crisis hit, and the price of oil went from $3 US to $12 per barrel. When the French government realized that keeping the SS France running would necessitate an additional $10 million a year, they opted instead to subsidize the then-developing Concorde. Without this government money, the French line could not operate, and with a press release issued in 1974, it was announced that the SS France would be withdrawn from service on October 25 of that year.
At that, the crew decided to take matters into their own hands. An eastbound crossing on September 6, her 202nd crossing, was delayed several hours while the crew met to decide whether to strike then and there in New York or 6 days later outside Le Havre.
At that, the crew decided to take matters into their own hands. An eastbound crossing on 6 September, her 202nd crossing, was delayed several hours while the crew met to decide whether to strike then and there in New York or 6 days later outside Le Havre. Le Havre won, and the ship was commandeered by a group of French trade unionists who anchored the SS France at the entrance to the port, thereby blocking all incoming and outgoing traffic. The 1,200 passengers aboard had to be ferried to show on tenders, while approximately 800 of the crew remained aboard.
The hijackers demanded that the ship be allowed to continue to serve, along with a 35% wage increase for themselves. However, their mission failed, and the night of the hijacking proved to be the ship's last day of service for the CGT. It took over a month for the standoff to end, and by December 7, 1974, the ship was moored at a distant quay in Le Havre, known colloquially as the Quai des Oubliés, the Pier of the Forgotten.
By that time, the SS France had completed 377 crossings and 93 cruises, including 2 world cruises, carried a total of 588,024 passengers on transatlantic crossings, and 113,862 passengers on cruises, and had sailed a total of 1,860,000 nautical miles.
In 1979, the derelict SS France was sold to the Norwegian cruise businessman Lauritz Kloster, owner of the Norwegian Caribbean Lines. He planned to turn the SS France into the world's largest cruise ship. The ship was renamed the Norway, and in 33 weeks, the SS France ocean liner was transformed into the SS Norway cruise ship. This is the windward dining room on the SS Norway, with virtually all the original decor from its incarnation as the Chambord dining room. On July 3, 1979, the refit was completed, and the SS Norway sailed for Miami, where the Norwegian Caribbean Lines are based. Although she was an awkward cruise ship, narrow, built for speed and with a deeper draft than other ships, and a lack of open deck areas. Nevertheless, the SS Norway proved to be a very popular cruise ship, in part because of her excellent reputation during her time as the SS France. In 1984, the Norwegian Caribbean Lines merged with the Royal Viking Cruise Line to form the largest cruise line in the world, with a fleet of 8 ships. The same year, the SS Norway was refitted with new upper-deck veranda cabins.
In 1990, the SS Norway underwent yet another major refit when 2 new decks were placed upon the superstructure, increasing her tonnage to 76,049 and her passenger capacity to 2,565. But this ruined the former elegance of the ship, giving her a much clumsier appearance.
This is a photograph of the SS Norway, taken during her later years. Note the 2 additional decks, greatly impairing the ship's appearance. During the 1990s, the SS Norway continued to be the popular cruise ship she always has been. But signs of her age have reminded the owners that the ship is pushing 40, very old for a ship of that type.
The SS Norway's rank as the largest passenger ship in service was taken away from her in 1988 when the 73,000-ton Sovereign of the Seas entered service. She reclaimed the title after her refit in 1990 but lost it again a few years later. The cruise ships are constantly growing in size, beating more and more of the liners in size. Today, the largest cruise ships have even passed the Queens in size, with many giants easily passing the astonishing 100,000-ton mark. And finally, a new transatlantic liner finally eclipsed her length when the 1,132 feet RMS Queen Mary II entered service in January 2004. In March 2004, NCL finally announced that the SS Norway would not return to service on the North American cruise market, and that other options were being evaluated. 3 months later, she was again taken under tow, destined to be scrapped after a remarkable and eventful 44-year career. By September 2008, most of what remained above the waterline had been cut away, and the ship's destruction was essentially completed by late 2008.
These are the specifications of the France Norway.
Immigration sponsored by the Australian government resulted in a busy trade between Europe and Australia, producing such notable ships as the SS Oriana and SS Canberra. These 2, operating on the P&O Orient line service, were the largest and fastest liners built for the Australian route.
This is a P&O postcard of the SS Oriana in her original livery. Still looking grand, the SS Oriana says goodbye to Australia.
This is the SS Canberra in Vancouver, Canada.
Before World War II, aircraft weren't a huge threat to ocean liners. Most of these aircraft were noisy, cramped and vulnerable to bad weather. However, World War II accelerated the development of aircraft. 4-engine bombers such as the Avro Lancaster and Boeing B-29, with its massive carrying capacity, was a natural prototype for a next-generation airliner. Jet aircraft technology also accelerated after Germany developed jet aircraft for military use in World War II. In 1953, the de Havilland Comet became the first commercial jet airliner. The de Havilland Comet was later followed by Sud Aviation Caravelle, Boeing 707 and Douglas DC-8. This is the Boeing 707. This is the Douglas DC-8.
In the 1960s, airlines gradually took over the business formerly done by ocean liners. In 1953, 38% of transatlantic passenger traffic was by air. In 1958, the first Boeing 707's full transatlantic service was introduced. By the following year, 2/3 of the passenger traffic was by air. And by 1965, a full 95% was by air.
For example, The price for a peak season flight in 2007, from New York City to London was about $400, and the flight time was about 7 hours. A transatlantic trip across the Atlantic Ocean from New York City to Southampton on the RMS Queen Mary 2 was a minimum of $14.50 and took 5 days. By the early 1970s, passenger ships were used almost exclusively for cruising. After the end of the large-scale passenger liner business, many ships continued in use as cruise ships, and as of 2003, a small number of former liners were still in service. A few more, such as RMS Queen Mary, are still afloat but permanently docked and used for other purposes. In the case of the RMS Queen Mary, it is now a hotel and a museum ship.
More recently, during the 1982 Falklands War, 3 ships that were active or former liners were requisitioned for war service by the British government. The Cunard liner RMS Queen Elizabeth II and the SS Canberra, a P&O cruise ship and former England to Australia liner, served as troop ships, carrying British Army personnel to Ascension Island and the Falkland Islands to recover the Falklands from the invading Argentine forces.
This is the RMS Queen Elizabeth II being launched into the River Clyde in the yards of John Brown and Company on September 20, 1967. The last of the great steamships, the RMS Queen Elizabeth II, was converted to diesel-electric power in the mid-1980s. With diesel-electric propulsion, the diesel engines replaced the steam turbines.
The only large liner still used on scheduled line voyages is Cunard Line's RMS Queen Mary 2, which replaced the line's RMS Queen Elizabeth II on the Transatlantic route in 2004. The RMS Queen Elizabeth II made its maiden voyage in 1969 and was the only major operational ocean liner for several decades, but now is given over to cruising.
Here the RMS Queen Elizabeth II sails under Verrazano Narrows Bridge as she completes her maiden voyage to New York in May 1969.
The RMS Queen Elizabeth II was operated by Cunard as both a transatlantic liner and a cruise ship from 1969 to 2008. She was then laid up and, since 2018, has been operating as a floating hotel in Dubai.
The maiden voyage of the RMS Queen Mary 2, the world's largest passenger liner, occurred in January 2004. This ship is 345 meters, 1,132 feet, long and 72 meters, 236 feet, high, rising 23 stories above the water, and can carry 2,695 passengers with 1,253 officers and crew. The RMS Queen Mary 2 operates between Southampton and New York City, and also spends time as a cruise ship in the Caribbean, South America and along the East Coast between New York City and Newport, Rhode Island. The RMS Queen Mary 2 is operated by Cunard Lines, acquired by the U.S.-based Carnival Corporation in 1998. At the time of her construction in 2003, the RMS Queen Mary 2 was the longest, widest and tallest passenger ship ever built, and at 151,400 gross tons, was also the largest.
The RMS Queen Mary 2 lost the distinction of being the largest to Royal Caribbean International's 158,000 gross ton Freedom of the Seas in April 2006. Still, the RMS Queen Mary II remains the largest ocean liner, as opposed to a cruise ship, ever built. And her height, length, and waterline breadth are unsurpassed by any other passenger ship.
As an ocean liner, the RMS Queen Mary II sails on a regular schedule between Southampton, England and New York City with a cruising speed of 30 knots, or 35 miles per hour, 56 kilometers per hour, making the trip in 5 days. This allows her to have a weekly transatlantic service between Southampton and New York City.
The RMS Queen Mary II, having been designed as an ocean liner, has 40% more steel than was required for a standard cruise ship. This is the Britannia restaurant on the RMS Queen Mary II. These are the lower 2 decks of the Grand Lobby on the RMS Queen Mary II.
This is the RMS Queen Mary II.
An azimuth thrust head, also known as a Z-drive, is a configuration of ship propellers placed in pods that can be rotated in any horizontal direction. A conventional rudder is not needed.
These give ships better maneuverability than a fixed propeller and rudder system. Primary advantages are electrical efficiency, better use of ship space, and lower maintenance costs. Ships with azimuth thrusters do not need tugs to dock, though they still need tugs to maneuver in difficult places. There are 2 major variants, based on the location of the motor. 1. Mechanical transmission, where the motor is inside the ship and power gets transmitted to the propeller via bevel gears. The motor may be either a directly mechanically connected diesel engine or an electrical motor, getting its power from generators run by electricity-producing engines, usually diesel engines, elsewhere in the ship. 2. Electrical transmission, where the electrical motor is in the pod itself, directly connected to the propeller without gearboxes. The energy used to drive the motor in the pod is produced by machinery inside the vessel, usually by diesel engines or gas turbines that drive electric generators, in a system comparable to that used by diesel-electric locomotives.
The RMS Queen Mary II is the largest ocean liner ever built and the first with a 4-pod installation, 2 fixed pods and 2 azipods. This gave her a speed of 30 knots, which is 34.5 miles per hour or 56 kilometers per hour. Thus, ships with azipods are steered without a rudder, similar to how small boats use an outboard motor for power and steering. However, the rear-mounted propellers or outboards push their vessels, while azipods, with forward-mounted propellers, pull their vessels. Officers on the bridge determine the positioning of the azipods and the speed of their motors. The Ms. Queen Victoria is a cruise ship operated by the Cunard Line, named after the former British monarch Queen Victoria. The vessel has the same basic design as other Vista-class cruise ships, including the RMS Queen Elizabeth. At 90,049 gross tonnage, GRT, she is the smallest of Cunard's ships in operation. The Ms. Queen Victoria was built in 2007 and has a capacity of 2,061 passengers.
Cruise ships.
Ocean liners have fallen out of favor recently due to the increased number of cruise ships being built. However, the experience of sailing on an ocean liner is still enjoyed by many people. Only one ocean liner is still sailing, the Cunard liner, the RMS Queen Mary II. She regularly completes transatlantic voyages between Southampton in the UK and New York City. Ocean liners and cruise ships are 2 very different things. They differ in both design and function. An ocean liner is designed, engineered, and built specifically to cross the ocean on a set schedule, similar to how you would make a scheduled train or a bus journey. Ocean liners feature a longer and more pointed bow. Why? Because they need to be able to travel through bad weather while maintaining a high-speed. Cruise ships frequently try to avoid storms. They often add sea days or miss ports of call to avoid bad weather. Ocean liners are far better designed to deal with bad weather. This makes ocean liners perfect for crossing long distances like the Atlantic Ocean. The only ocean liner currently in service is the RMS Queen Mary II. She can travel at 30 knots, 35 mph. Cruise ships usually sail between 18 and 20 knots, 20–23 mph. An ocean liner generally has a thicker hull than a cruise ship to endure the open ocean, especially the rigors of the often stormy North Atlantic. An ocean liner generally has a thicker hull than a cruise ship to endure the open ocean better. The RMS Queen Mary II features steel hull plating. It is described as extra thick for rigidity during Atlantic crossings, and is almost twice as thick as that found on most cruise ships. Cruise ships can and do cross the Atlantic and other open oceans, but they aren't designed to do this journey after journey repeatedly. They are better suited to sailing along the coast, making multiple port stops. Ocean liners and cruise ships are two very different things. They differ in both design and function. An ocean liner is designed, engineered, and built specifically to cross the ocean on a set schedule, similar to how you would make a scheduled train or a bus journey. Ocean liners feature a longer and more pointed bow. Why? Because they need to be able to travel through bad weather while maintaining a high-speed. Cruise ships frequently try to avoid storms. They often add sea days or miss ports of call to avoid bad weather.
Ocean liners are far better designed to deal with bad weather. This makes ocean liners perfect for crossing long distances like the Atlantic Ocean. The only ocean liner currently in service is the RMS Queen Mary II. She can travel at 30 knots, 35 miles per hour. Cruise ships usually sail between 18 and 20 knots, 20 to 23 miles per hour. An ocean liner generally has a thicker hull than a cruise ship to endure the open ocean, especially the rigors of the often stormy North Atlantic.
An ocean liner generally has a thicker hull than a cruise ship to endure the open ocean better. The RMS Queen Mary II features steel hull plating. It is described as extra thick for rigidity during Atlantic crossings, and is almost twice as thick as that found on most cruise ships. Cruise ships can and do cross the Atlantic and other open oceans, but they aren't designed to do this journey after journey repeatedly. They are better suited to sailing along the coast, making multiple port stops.
Why aren't ocean liners built anymore? They are rarely built anymore because cruise ships provide a higher return on investment than ocean liners. The last ocean liner to be built was the RMS Queen Mary II in 2003. There is less demand for ocean liners from modern-day travelers when compared to cruise ships. Modern big cruise ships are increasingly able to do the things that ocean liners were built for. Modern cruise ships now have the ability to cruise long distances and sail through bad weather. There is no need for ocean liners to be built just to transport people across oceans. People rarely emigrate from one continent to another in great numbers by ship, as they once did. As a result, cruise lines have stopped building ocean liners and instead changed to producing cruise ships. The design of cruise ships has changed dramatically in the last few decades. The average size of cruise ships has increased, and demand for cruising has. Two cruise ships often have many balcony cabins, giving them a less sleek, almost top-heavy appearance.
Cruise lines can make more money selling the more expensive balcony cabins. Their design has changed to fit in as many balcony cabins as possible.
There is less interest in ocean liners. Cruises on cruise ships usually begin and end at the same port. It's akin to a floating city that tours you around an itinerary, and then drops you off where you started. In contrast, an ocean liner is designed to take guests from point A to point B. They run a scheduled service, and make few or no port stops in between.
A voyage on an ocean liner may start in Southampton in the UK and end in New York City. To return home, guests need a separate flight or second voyage. From the perspective of the modern traveler, a cruise is usually simpler and cheaper than taking a long trip on an ocean liner.
Repositioning cruises are a good option if you want to cruise on a budget. Some of the best and cheapest cruises are repositioning cruises. Cruise ships can sail on repositioning cruises, similar to the journeys that an ocean liner would traditionally make. For this reason, there is no need to keep building ocean liners. Cruise ships are far more flexible.
Most cruise ships will complete a season in one location, like the Mediterranean, then move to another destination, like the Caribbean, for the winter months. It is easier to sell cruises in the Caribbean in the winter when the weather improves. This is where demand is highest, and cruise lines can quickly fill their cabins.
Flights are easily accessible. With flights becoming cheaper and more accessible, it doesn't make sense to sail on an ocean liner across the ocean, in the same way as it did in the past.
A trip on an ocean liner between New York and Southampton typically takes around 5 days, and will cost about $1,000 and up. In comparison, you can fly from New York to the UK in hours, and for as little as $200.
Flights are much cheaper and faster, so taking a cruise across the Atlantic or Pacific is usually reserved for those who do so for the cruise liner experience or don't want to fly. The booze cruise. In the United States, Prohibition was accomplished by the 18th Amendment to the Constitution, ratified January 16, 1919, and the Volstead Act, passed October 28, 1919. Prohibition began on January 16, 1920, when the 18th Amendment went into effect.
The Immigration Restriction Act of 1924 was designed consciously to halt the immigration of people from Southern and Eastern Europe, whose numbers had mushroomed during the period from 1900 to 1920. The method was to scale the number of immigrants from each country in proportion to their percentage of the U.S. population in the 1890 census, when Northern and Western Europeans were the dominant immigrants.
Under the new law, Southern and Eastern European quotas were reduced from 45% to 15%. The 1924 Act ended the most significant era of immigration in U.S. history. This is an Orient Line poster from 1898. Orient Lines was the first to use liners for cruising in the 1880s to destinations from the fjords of Norway to the Caribbean, then known more commonly as the West Indies.
Following the demise of the great ocean liners, cruise ships emerged as the lavish and opulent ships of the sea. Although cruise vacations date from the 19th century, they did not reach the popularity they enjoy today until the 1960s.
It was in the 1980s that the cruise ship industry experienced extraordinary growth, and by the mid-1990s, More people we traveling by ship than ever before. 31 million in 2023.
Cruise ship tourism is one of the areas that have experienced the biggest growth in the last decades. While international tourism has multiplied by 28 times in the previous 50 years, reaching almost 700 million people in 2000, an equal increase has been noted in the number of cruise ship passengers, but this time in just 30 years. While back in the 1970s, barely 500,000 people chose to cruise for their vacation. Today, this figure exceeds 12 million, generating profits of $17 billion per year. Almost 70% of the 50 million people estimated to have sailed on a cruise ship have done so in the last 30 years.
Ocean liner disasters. The most well-known liner was the RMS Titanic, infamous for sinking on her maiden voyage from Britain to the United States in 1912 and losing 1,523 lives in 1914. The RMS Empress of Ireland sank in the St. Lawrence River, with 1,012 lives lost. The RMS Lusitania was lost in 1915 to a German U-boat during World War I while on passage from the United States to Britain.
The worst disasters were the loss of the RMS Lancashire in 1940 off St. Nazaire, France, to German bombing with the loss of over 3,000 lives and the sinking of the Wilhelm Gustloff in the Baltic Sea, with over 9,000 lost in 1945. The Italian liner SS Andrea Doria sank after colliding with the SS Stockholm under heavy fog in 1956. Even though the SS Andrea Doria was fitted with radar.
The Wilhelm Gustloff was a large ocean-going vessel launched by Nazi Germany and operated by the KDF organization as a cruise ship. During World War II, it was requisitioned by the military for use as a hospital ship. The Wilhelm Gustloff was sunk by a Soviet submarine in 1945 in the Baltic Sea, with over 9,000 lost.
This is a 1938 Nazi propaganda poster advertising the KDF Strength Through Joy movement offering cheap travel for German workers and their families. This is the Wilhelm Gustloff at its launch ceremony in Hamburg 1938. It was named after a Swiss Nazi leader who was assassinated in 1936.
On March 29, 1938, the second KDF cruise ship was launched. The ship was named Robert Ley, after the leader of the Deutsche Arbeitsfront or DAF in Germany. The Robert Ley and Wilhelm Gustloff were fitted with small engines, as their all-out cruising services did not require high speeds, and neither of the two ships would ever exceed 16 knots. This is the Robert Ley, as a hospital ship during World War II.
The Blue Riband is an unofficial award given to the passenger liner crossing the Atlantic Ocean in regular service with the record highest average speed. The term was borrowed from horse racing and was not widely used until after 1910. The record is based on average speed rather than passage time because ships follow different routes.
Also, Eastbound and Westbound speed records are reckoned separately, as the more difficult Westbound record voyage, against the Gulf Stream and the prevailing weather systems, typically results in lower average speeds.
Starting with the earliest steamships, speeds were down in the range of 7 or 8 knots. Over the years, the speeds gradually increased, reaching 30 knots with the RMS Queen Mary, and then almost 35 knots with the SS United States.
Going eastbound, The speeds of the earliest steamboats were slower due to the unfavorable winds, with the Sirius barely managing 6 knots and the Great Western reaching 10 knots. The SS United States got over 35 knots in this direction, and some of the newer catamarans exceed 40 knots. Going eastbound, the speeds of the earliest steamboats were slower due to the unfavorable winds, with the Sirius barely managing 6 knots and the Great Western reaching 10 knots. The SS United States got over 35 knots in this direction, and some of the newer catamarans exceed 40 knots.
Of the 35 Atlantic liners to hold the Blue Riband, 25 were British, followed by 5 German, 3 American, as well as 1 each from Italy and France. 13 of these record-breaking ships owned by Cunard, plus the RMS Queen Mary of the Cunard White Star Line. 5 were owned by White Star, 4 owned by Nordicher Lloyd, 2 by Collins, 2 by Inman and 2 by Guion, and 1 each by British American, Great Western, Hamburg America, the Italian Line, Compagnie Générale Transatlantic, and finally the United States Lines. The Sirius is considered the first Atlantic record holder for her 1838 voyage to New York at 8.03 knots, 14.87 kilometers per hour. Note that 1 knot equals 1.15 miles per hour. So 8.03 knots is 9.24 miles per hour.
These are the fastest ships westbound across the Atlantic from the UK to New York, from the Sirius in 1838 to the Persia in 1856. The first steamship, the Sirius, took 18½ days to make the trip at only 8 knots average speed.
These are the fastest ships westbound across the Atlantic from the UK to New York, from the Scotia in 1863 to the Etruria in 1888. The crossing time with the Scotia was now down to a little over 8 days at 14.5 knots, decreasing to 6 days at 19.6 knots with the Etruria.
These are the fastest ships westbound across the Atlantic from the UK to New York, from the city of Paris in 1889 to the Deutschland in 1900. The crossing time with the city of Paris in 1889 was now down to a little less than 6 days at 20 knots, decreasing to 5½ days as 23 knots with the Deutschland in 1900. These are the fastest ships westbound across the Atlantic from the UK to New York, from the Kronprinz Wilhelm in 1902 to the Normandy in 1937. The crossing time with the Kronprinz Wilhelm in 1902 was now down to 5½ days at 23 knots, decreasing to just under 4 days, and a very fast 30.6 knots with the Normandy in 1937.
Finally, these are the fastest ships westbound across the Atlantic from the UK to New York, from the RMS Queen Mary in 1938 to the SS United States in 1952. The crossing time with the RMS Queen Mary in 1938 was now down to just under 4 days at 31 knots, decreasing to only 3½ days at a very fast 34.54 knots, or almost 40 miles per hour with the SS United States in 1952.
Again, the Sirius is the first Atlantic record holder for her 1838 voyage to the UK at 7.3 knots, a little bit slower than the 8 knots of the voyage westbound from the UK to New York. These are the fastest ships eastbound across the Atlantic from New York to the UK, from the Sirius in 1838 to the Persia in 1856. The first steamship, the Sirius, that took 15 days to make the trip at only 7.3 knots average speed.
These are the fastest ships eastbound across the Atlantic from New York to the UK, from the city of Brussels in 1869 to the Etruria in 1888. The crossing time with the city of Brussels was now down to a little less than 8 days at 14.7 knots, decreasing to 6 days at 19.4 knots with the Etruria.
These are the fastest ships eastbound across the Atlantic from New York to the UK, from the city of Paris in 1889 to the RMS Mauritania in 1907. The crossing time with the city of Paris was now down to 6 days at 20 knots, decreasing to a little under 5 days at 23.7 knots with the RMS Mauritania.
These are the fastest ships eastbound across the Atlantic from New York to the UK, from the RMS Mauritania in 1908 to the RMS Queen Mary in 1938. The crossing time with the RMS Mauritania was now down to just 5 days at 23.9 knots, decreasing to a little under 4 days at 31.7 knots with the RMS Queen Mary.
Cunard White Star's RMS Queen Mary regained the Blue Riband at 31.69 knots, 58.69 kilometers h, in 1938. She held the record for 14 years until 1952, when the SS United States won the Blue Riband at 35.59 knots, 65.91 kilometers h. That's 41 miles per hour.
The SS United States won the Blue Riband at 35.59 knots, 65.91 kilometers/h, or 41 miles per hour, in 1952, and retains the record to this day as the longest period the speed record has been held by any passenger liner across the Atlantic.
Now, we will look at a timeline of the evolution of transatlantic liners and cruise ships.
These are passenger ships from 1831 to 1843. In the beginning of the era of steam power, although sails were still being used.
These are passenger ships from 1841 to 1858. This is still in the beginning of the era of steam power, although sails were used as an auxiliary source of propulsion whenever possible. The SS Great Eastern marked a great leap forward in size and a passenger capacity of 4,000.
These are passenger ships from 1888 to 1901. This marks the end of the use of sails. These ships carried between 1,500 and 2,000 passengers across the Atlantic.
These are passenger ships from 1901 to 1906. These ships carried between 1,000 and almost 3,000 passengers across the Atlantic. These are passenger ships from 1907 to 1912. These ships carried between 2,000 and 2,500 passengers across the Atlantic.
These were passenger ships from 1912 to 1922. These ships are reaching 50,000 GRT in size.
These were passenger ships from 1922 to 1936. With the SS Normandie and the RMS Queen Mary, the displacements are reaching 80,000 tons in lengths of 1,000 feet, 300 meters. These were passenger ships from 1936 to the post-war era of 1972. The length of the ships had remained at about 1,000 feet, 300 meters. Now, with competition from air travel, we see the near end of the great transatlantic liners and the beginning of the great cruise ships of 1987 to 1996. These cruise ships carried between 2,000 to 3,000 passengers. We are now in the cruise ship era of the 1990s to the present. These are the cruise ships from 1998 to 2000. with passenger capacities now exceeding 3,000 and displacements up to 137,000 tons.
These are the more recent cruise ships from 2002 to 2006. With substantial passenger capacities now reaching 4,500 and displacements up to 154,000 tons.
These are the exceedingly large cruise ships of the more recent era from 2007 to 2016, with enormous passenger capacities reaching 6,700 and displacements up to 227,000 tons. Most recently, in 2018, we have the Royal Caribbean Symphony of the Seas, with an enormous passenger capacity of 6,680 and a displacement of 228,000 tons. Royal Caribbean International's Icon of the Seas is a mammoth 365 meters long, nearly 1,200 feet, and will weigh a projected 250,800 tons. It sets sail on Caribbean waters in January 2024 and will accommodate 5,610 passengers and 2,350 crew.
Recommended videos, Ocean Liners, Part 3. Recommended video, Why Ocean Liners are stronger and faster than cruise ships.
Recommended video, The Rise of the Ocean Liner. Evolution of Ocean Liners Documentary Part 1.
Recommended video, How 4-stacker ocean liners took over the world. Evolution of Ocean Liners. Documentary Part 2.
Recommended video, The Liners, Ships of Destiny, Episode 1, Maiden Voyage.
Recommended video, The Liners, Ships of Destiny, Episode 2, Ships of War.
Recommended video, The Liners, Ships of Destiny, Episode 3, The Great Duel.
Recommended video, The Liners, Ships of Destiny, Episode 4, Endless Voyage.
Recommended video, The Difference Between Ocean Liners and Cruise Ships.
Recommended video, Life inside the world's largest cruise ship ever built.
Recommended video, YouTube navigation. Table of Contents, Ocean Liners, Part 3.
Thanks for watching. Please watch some more of my great videos.